Hey guys, it's me. Um, Second episode of the podcast, and today's episode is going to be about Aphrodite. Um, Last episode was about Aphrodite and Ares, and that kind of like relationship and balance that they have with each other. And today I want to specifically talk about Aphrodite, right? Um, and to start, I figured I'd give myself like a real like proper introduction. Um, I'm Ty. I'm pretty eclectic when it comes to this kind of stuff. Um, I'm a polytheist. You know. Um, I think there's a little bit of truth in everything. I've studied Buddhism, Taoism, a little bit of Confucianism. Pretty interesting. I do want to research more of that. Um, but I kind of poke in in a lot of corners of this space. You could say I'm like a jack of all trades. Um, but yeah, I just felt like I didn't really do like a super good intro for myself uh in the last one, so just want to make some of that stuff a bit more clear. But right, so Aphrodite. Um I'm not going to spend too much time harping on stuff that's like more well known about her. Um I will pull I will point to some specific stuff that I feel like people who are just getting into Aphrodite may not fully know. Um, but yeah, so first, let's start off with where Aphrodite comes from, right? Because a lot of people, when they first start poking around at this, they just kind of assume that, all the gods are Greek gods. They started in Greece and blah, 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 blah. But that's just not true. That's not how a lot of cultures worked in ancient times. It's like someone goes somewhere, sees something cool that really clicks with them, and then they bring it back to, where they came from. Their interpretation's a little bit different, and then over time, it gets more and more adapted by the culture they're from, right? And this happened with Aphrodite, who I believe originates Egypt as Ishtar, you know. And then eventually she gets adopted into Greece, and then because even the Greeks honored her as an ancient and mysterious goddess, which is interesting. But and then the Romans kind of syncretized her with Venus. Um, but a lot of her like fundamental traits have carried over from iteration to iteration. She is a love goddess. A lot of beginners tend to think this is more like romantic love. Um, Aphrodite is just kind of the goddess of love in general, right? Familial, friendship, romantic, sexual, right? Any kind of love, Aphrodite, she's got a little thing over it, right? And then a lot of her children will be the gods of a more specific kind of love, like Eros being the god of sexual desire and love and that kind of love. Um, but yeah, her being a love goddess isn't something I wanted to harp on too much because that's something that's more common. Um, and so because of this, a lot of time people will reach out to her for love. They'll reach out to her for love spells. They'll also reach out to her for like self love and confidence, which kind of ties into her beauty aspect. And now, as the goddess of beauty, she kind of rules over these two different kinds of beauty. You have Aphrodite Orania, right? Heavenly Aphrodite, who she's just that like universal beauty almost. That like when you go outside and you see like a really nice view, like you're looking around, you're like, damn, these mountains are fire, bro. These clouds are amazing. Aphrodite, that's that kind of love, or that's that kind of beauty, that Orania aspect to her. But then you also have Aphrodite Pandemos, right? Who is this is like Aphrodite of the people, right? This is like when you see like a beautiful person, you're like, damn, she bad. Aphrodite, Aphrodite, Aphrodite. Um, and yeah, and so people will, that I feel like ties in with self confidence a lot. It's like how you view your own beauty. I think it's important to view your own beauty in a positive light. And Aphrodite can help. She can help. She can teach you the ways. She can teach you the ways. But for like the witches out there, Aphrodite would just be like a huge help with glamour magic. You know, especially if you are a witch and you already work with Aphrodite. You probably already do glamour magic, but if you haven't, I'd invest. I'd invest. She does like makeup. She does like makeup. Um, but and then get into something that is I feel like is like a little weird in her standing, but she's also a sea goddess. She's a goddess of the sea, right? And I feel like once you say that to people, they'll be like, "Oh, you know what? Yeah, she was born from the sea, wasn't she?" But not a lot of people know off rip that she does have like important ties with the sea. Like a lot of ancient people would pray to her, for fair and safe voyages. It's like if you're going out to go fishing, you're praying to Poseidon and Aphrodite, right? She had many epithets relating to this aspect of her. Um, but yeah, um, she's also the goddess of sensuality, though, which something not a lot of people I think know is that ancient priests and priestess they would do sex rituals, right, in the temples. Um, Now I'm not sure if these were done with like a specific like we're doing this to get this, or if it was just more something that was done in honor of Aphrodite. But I assume you could do both, right? I know a lot of modern, or not a lot of modern, but I know there's a decent amount of people out there who practice like sex magic. Aphrodite would be a huge help. She'd be a huge help for that. Um, but yeah, she teaches us to embrace our sensuality. Um, because I feel like a lot of people, especially a lot of people with like some heavy Christian baggage, you're just coming from like purity culture in general. There's this weird aversion to sex and sensuality, which you know I don't know. I feel like Aphrodite can teach you to embrace that more, or even if you don't want to embrace it, she can help you to view it through a different lens. Because you know even if you aren't someone who likes sex, you still got to work on your bias towards other people who do view it differently, and who do kind of get around, right? Like I don't think it's a bad thing to have sex with a lot of people, but yeah. um but kind of going from that aspect, she's also like she's never like explicitly called a goddess of acceptance, but I feel like that's just like pretty much like a core aspect of her, because that's just first of all like a core aspect of love, right? Um, Love is pretty much all accepting, but we also see this, with her role as like a patron of prostitutes, who it's like in ancient times was it as bad to be a prostitute? I mean, no, but you faced a lot of violence, right? Aphrodite, she'll help you with that, right? And in modern times, with it being illegal, it's right? Like, even though it's against the rules of man, Aphrodite still accepts you, and she actually supports you, right? Um, but we also see this with her ties to the LGBT community. One of her children, Hermaphroditus, actually, who is a son of Aphrodite and Hermes, um, ends up meeting a nymph who falls in love with him so much that she prays, to just, be one with this man. And Aphrodite takes her at her very literal word and combines them into one, right? And so now you got a penis, but you also got boobs. And that's hermaphroditus. But we also see this in like some of her like ancient statues too, which is very interesting because there's this popular like statue image of her that was recreated a bunch of times in ancient times where it's Aphrodite, with her breasts out. Sometimes they're covered, with a toga, but she's lifting up her skirt, right? And a lot of times it's showing a vagina, but sometimes it's showing a penis. And so I think, that's something that's really interesting where, she's not just a goddess of feminine sensuality, she's the goddess of sensuality in its entirety, right? And then, there are specific aspects of her that honor that femininity more, but end of the day, she's a goddess of sensuality in its totality, right? Um, but but yeah, and then being the god or the goddess of love, why is she gonna hate gay people? Like that's something. This is kind of like a side rant. That's something that never made sense to me about how a lot of Christians interpret the a Bible, because like why would the all loving God punish you for loving someone? That just doesn't make sense to me. That just doesn't make sense to me. Um, but I also want to dive into Aphrodite Aurea, which is, a lot of people will point out this, her having this war aspect, but I don't think they often dive into that a whole lot. I believe Ishtar has war goddess ties, so that's just like her ancient, pre-Greek times, she was seen as this like war goddess too. But Aphrodite Aurea, obviously refers to Aphrodite, lover of Ares, but not just that, right? In the Gigantomachy, actually, she helps Heracles to slay some giants, right? She's standing in front of this cave on a mountain that Heracles is hiding in, right? And she's luring in, giants, with her beauty, and Heracles gets the jump on her, right? But we also see her, kind of starting the Trojan War almost, bribing uh, Paris, and then giving him Helen of Troy, Um, but yeah, I did kind of want to point out those um like examples of her and her like war goddess ties, because I feel like sometimes people just say that and then they don't really point to any examples of it. Um, but yeah, next I want to talk about I want to highlight a few of her kids. I think I've already mentioned Eros. He's a son of Ares and Aphrodite, and he's a god of like sexual desire and sexual love. He's that like yearning force of love, and and in some myths, Ares and Aphrodite actually had another son, called Anteros or Anti Eros, who instead of being the god of yearning and wanting, he's that god of reciprocal love, you know? And sometimes you'll actually see Aphrodite holding like a scale, and you'll see Eros on one side and Anteros on the other, being that like counterbalance to each other, which I think is really interesting. But then you have Phobos and Deimos, which is interesting because these guys aren't like really loving God. These are the gods of fear and dread. Um, then they are sons of Ares and Aphrodite. Um, but I think something not a lot of people highlight, with that, them being fear gods tie. It's not necessarily just fear in like I mean like obviously it's like any kind of fear, it's gonna relate to them in some way. but more specifically, they were like the gods of loss, right? And it's like you got to think, what are end of the day, why are you afraid of stuff? Because you're gonna lose something, whether that be your life, your loved ones, your money, your wallet, your house, right? But end of the day, if you're afraid of something, it's usually because you're afraid of losing something. If you don't have that fear of losing something, 9 times out of 10, there's no reason to be afraid. But that's something I did want to highlight with them. Then you have Har- Harmonia, who's another daughter of Ares, and Aphrodite, obviously. But she's the goddess of harmony, kind of obvious in the name. But she's that like universal harmony, but also that like relationship harmony, political harmony in the world. Um, and the last one I want to highlight, because this is one I didn't know about until recently, and I feel like regarding mainstream practice, I feel like a lot of people would consider him a minor god, but I actually want to talk about Iacchos, who is the son of Aphrodite and Dionysus. Um, and he wasn't really like a super well-known popular god, I don't think, but he was important to the Eleusinian mysteries, right? And he was actually seen as the leader in chief, and he was the god who ruled over the cry of joy, which is like a ritual cry that they would do. Um, and so yeah, I just kind of want to like highlight it that where it's like very interesting that the son of Aphrodite and Dionysus, um, I don't know, I don't know, I just thought something that was kind of interesting. Um, and real quick before I dive into like more modern worship, I kind of want to highlight some key lessons that I've learned that I feel like a lot of other people, learn when they're working with her. But the number one thing is like self love. A lot of people, start working with Aphrodite because they have, self confidence issues. They're not really proud of who they are. They have some like insecurities about themselves, and Aphrodite helps us to fully accept ourselves and to see the love in everything, right? And I feel like that's a big thing I've learned from her. I've learned, I'm still like learning how to like properly like express and like outreach, to people to form connections. But since working with her, I've been able to see those connections a lot more, I feel. It's like once you start working with her, once you start working with the goddess of love, you start to truly see love everywhere in everything. And I mean, this is something that like people have come to the conclusion of, without Aphrodite, right? Like I mean, Jesus, he talked a lot about love. He talked about loving your 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 neighbor. He talked about like loving everyone, blah blah blah. Um, but we also have like pretty like big spiritual philosopher guys to talk about it too, like Ram Dass. He he was always yammer about love and loving everyone, and I do think that is something a lot more people need to do. I think love is it's always there. You're always going to have love for someone. It's whether you give them access to that love, right? And I don't think you need to give everybody access to your love, but you know, you shouldn't just I feel like the default is I love everyone. Some people don't deserve my love, right? Like there's people who are going to act immorally in this life, right? Like we got a lot of politicians right now who are pieces of shit, right? Pieces of shit, right? And you know, if they died tomorrow, would I cry? No. Would I bat an eye? No. Would I be remotely sad? No. But you know, I just feel like as a child care a teacher, being able to see people before they grow up and become these kind of people, it's like they weren't always like that. You know, the person they are now is a result of consequences they have made, right? And if you believe in reincarnation, it's like who knows who they were in the last life, who knows who they're going to be in the next life, right? So you can love the spirit, but you don't need to love the person. You can love the spirit without loving the person. Um and in that vein, she's kind of helped me to work on my own judgment towards others, right? Like I've noticed myself, I'm a lot better at catching my own judgment towards others and being able to keep it on a leash. Um, but yeah, I think learning to love yourself goes hand in hand with learning to love others, right? Because you can't love others until you love yourself. You can't stop judging others if you can't stop judging yourself, right? I actually think that's where a lot of judgment tends to come from, It's people have these judgments about themselves and they feel bad when they do this thing. And so they see someone else doing this thing or living this way. And it's like, if I feel bad about this, it must be a bad thing. Why are you doing it? But I don't know. But yeah, Aphrodite kind of a lot of the time helps us to unlearn and work through a lot of that stuff we have. Um, what are some other things I've learned from Aphrodite? I think I already touched on it, but like embracing your sensuality. Um, a lot of people growing up in these Puritan cultures, sex is seen as this very taboo thing. Like it's got one purpose. That one purpose is reproduction, or even the people who are a little bit more free with it. They're like it's something special. It's between you and one person, and I don't think it's like everyone's sensuality is going to be different, but there's this idea that it's like what I'm comfortable with needs to be the norm, and it's like, well, you know, in ancient times there were people who fucking loved sex, right? You'd walk down the street, you might have seen a naked person or two, depending where you are. Um, but sexuality was something that was celebrated in ancient time, right? Like we had these like huge, you know, for fertility festivals, and like yeah, primarily it's just for like agricultural fertility. But you had people walking around with fake, penises. I actually saw that Athens recently. They redid an ancient festival, and I saw motherfuckers walking around with the biggest fake penises ever. I'm like, God damn, 2 feet? What the fuck are we doing? But yeah, I don't think Aphrodite teaches you to be more sexual. She teaches you to embrace the sexuality that you already have, and she teaches you to accept others for how they are with their sexuality and their sensuality, right? Like, sure, Mandy, she fucked 3 guys this week. You don't gotta call her a whore, right? Like, who knows? Maybe those guys were really nice fucking guys, They could have been really fucking cool. They could have been really fucking hot, right? And it's like, hey, we're vibing. We can connect a little bit more for the night. It's like, hey, it's like, even if that's not your thing, You just got to acknowledge that some people's things. I don't gotta shame them for it, right? Um, yeah, I'm trying to think. Any other big ones I want to talk about? I don't think so. I don't think so. All right, so kind of diving into like modern worship with her. I got like a few categories here, right? Like incense, right? It's one of the first things I want to talk about, just because it's the first thing I bullet pointed. Obviously rose, right? Duh. But also just like sweet smells, like if you got like some like cinnamon in the house, or I don't know, you got like raspberry for some reason. I don't know. There's raspberry incense. There's raspberry candles. It might be raspberry incense. Um, she might like that, right? Just anything sweet. But per the ancients, right? Cannabis, weed, marijuana, right? In ancient times, her temples actually, oftentimes, they used cannabis incense. Now, I don't think they were smoking cannabis back then, but they were doing the popular method where you get a bunch, put it in a box, light it, right? I know, like ancient humans, right? Like still like even before the fucking like Greeks and shit, right? Like they would get like a box, like a little box, put some weed in it, you know. Sorry, I saw a bug. Um, put some weed in it. Everybody, we getting in a fucking TP 10 type shit. Seal that hoe up. Just smoke that bitch. Just let it spill. Like ancient hot boxing. Um, but yeah, that's something I feel like a lot of people didn't know. And for my Aphrodite devotees out there who also smoke weed, you can now incorporate that in your Aphrodite worship. Um, and then I want to get into some like offerings. Um, chocolate is not something that the ancients would have done because chocolate comes from South America, I believe. Um, maybe like Central America too, maybe. I think so actually, yeah. But okay, whatever. I'm getting off rant. Um, but a lot of people in modern times associate her with chocolate, just it being sweet, and then also it's like romantic shit, like Valentine's Day. What do you get your girl? Chocolate. You get her chocolate and some flowers, some chocolate and some roses. Aphrodite, Aphrodite. Um, but also juicy fruits. That's something that I saw another person say. Just like that, like indulgent fruits. Something they were talking about was like Aphrodite being the god of indulgence. Like her teaching you that it's okay to let loose every once in a while. It's like it's okay to indulge in these things that make you feel good, right? And so just like these like super juicy fruits, like peaches, right? Plums. If you guys know pears, juicy pears, top 10. There's like crispy pears that kind of snap like an apple. I prefer mine like juicy, right? I'm one of those guys. But pastries, right? You can give her pastries. Those are sweet. Um, we're kind of moving away from like food offerings. You can give her like makeup. You can give her clothing. Um, sorry. When you're giving her clothing though, I wouldn't give her like old beat up clothing, and I wouldn't give her clothes that you don't like, right? Because if you don't like it, you know, why are you gonna give it to Aphrodite, right? So it's like it should be something that you yourself would wear. I feel, or even if you wouldn't wear it, it should be something that you can say would look good on someone else, right? If you can say, I think this this looks good, you can give it to Aphrodite, right? But also mirrors. You can put like a mirror on the altar. She's heavily associated with them. Um, real quick, some crystals, rose quartz, pearls, emerald for some reason. A lot of people say. I'm not too sure about that. Or I personally, I'm not sure what the connection there is, so I can't speak on it too much. But not really a crystal, but I don't know where else I would put it. Seashells. Seashells. Heavily associated. And then some devotional activities, right? Obviously research Aphrodite, volunteer at places, right? DV shelters, food banks, right? Um, it doesn't really matter necessarily what you're volunteering to do. It's just more about why you're doing it, right? Obviously, do it for Aphrodite, and by extension, do it for love, right? When you're volunteering, you should be doing it because you love your community and you love, the people in it, right? And you want to help them out. Um, Next, I would say defend love, right? And this is where, my more po- political people out there, if you're seeing some fucked up shit going on in the world, don't stand by and do nothing, right? Aphrodite is a love goddess, but she's also a war goddess, right? So use or embrace that war aspect to protect that love aspect, right? Because when hate and violence threaten peace and love gotta rise up. Peace and love gotta rise up, right? Um, and so yeah, I feel like protesting would be like a huge thing for Aphrodite. Like going to an anti-war protest is both something you could do for Aphrodite and Ares, right? As a god of rebellion and war aversion, right? Um, and also just like honor love, like just hold love in like this like high like value thing, just like I don't know. And then just like doing your makeup, singing, dancing, Aphrodite loves that shit. When you feel good, Aphrodite feels good, right? But also, like we saw with the ancients in the temples, you can devote having sex to Aphrodite, right? I see a lot of people say that like at the point of climax, they will like they'll like yell out to her, or a lot of people I think will yell out to Eros. Um, you know, if it works for you, do it. I'm not saying not to. I'm not gonna say if I have or haven't done that, but um, but yeah, yeah. So real quick before ending, I want to keep, I want to give you some kind of like further research topics you can dive into. Um, the first one I would say is Venusian energy, right? Because that's something that is inherently linked to Aphrodite and Venus. I'm not gonna go into it too much, but I think you can put two and two together. That it's that like energy that's associated with them, and there's a bit more to it. I think it is like astrology related a little bit, but definitely something worth researching. And for my more magical people, I've already mentioned like sex magic and sex rituals were a thing to her. And so I would just research, other cultures, sex rituals and sex magic, how they view sex, and how they, treated sex, right? Like in India, sex was something that, was utilized, That's actually going to tie into something I'm going to say after. We'll put a pin in that, right? Next thing, obviously, research some of her epithets, right? Get a nice list of ones that really click for you, or honestly, you can make your own, right? There's this like weird thing in the community I feel where it's like creating new stuff for the gods and like about the gods. It's like a kind of like taboo thing. Like I create, new myths about the gods. I create stories about the gods. I might actually share a few on here at some point. Um, but yeah, don't be afraid to create new stuff. If you feel something about a a god and you feel like you really feel it, there's a decent chance that that's what the God wants from you. You know, that's what the God is trying to show you, right? Um, yeah. But kind of tying back into the sex magic ritual thing in India, I would research Tantra, right? And not just tantric uh, practices, not just Tantra relating to sex and sensuality, but just the whole philosophy and practice of Tantra itself. Because there's so much more into it, right? Like, Tantra is this like whole thing, and a lot of people focus on this one bit right here that is, you know, obviously like sex stuff. But there's this whole slice of pie here, right? And this shit's just as good. This shit's just as good, right? So definitely, you know, research that, you know, and if it clicks with you, it clicks with you, you know? Um, but yeah, that's really about it, you know. Wish you all, you know, the best. Godspeed with you.